The distress signal came through just as Jason Harper was finishing another round of patching leaks in the coolant system, a humdrum task he'd done 100 times before. He stared at the flashing light on the console, wiping grease from his hands onto his already filthy coveralls. "That's not one of ours," he muttered, leaning closer to the control panel. "Ignore it," came a voice from the comm behind him. It was Davis, his shift partner and perpetual buzzkill. "Could be pirates. Could be worse. We're not paid to play hero, Jason." Jason ignored him and tapped into the signal. The coordinates were too close to be coincidence. Whatever was out there was practically in their backyard. "It's not pirates," he said. "Signal's automated. Looks like an escape pod." "Great. So best case, we're talking about a lawsuit from whatever corporation owns it." Jason rubbed his temples but didn't respond. He wasn't in the mood for Davis's cynicism. Something about the signal tugged at his gut like a challenge left unanswered. "I'm going," he said, grabbing his helmet from the rack. "You're going to get us all killed," Harper Davis warned, but Jason had already disengaged the docking clamps on his maintenance skiff. The escape pod was lodged between two jagged rocks in the asteroid field, its sleek design unlike anything Jason had ever seen. It wasn't human, that much was obvious. The hull shimmered faintly, a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He docked the skiff and pried the hatch open with a plasma cutter, his pulse quickening with each spark. Inside was a single occupant. She didn't look like any alien Jason had ever seen in the holo briefings back on Mars. Her skin was a deep silver, almost metallic, and her hair glistened like threads of liquid gold. Her facial features were strikingly humanoid, but her eyes, large, luminous, and a shade of violet that seemed to pulse faintly, were unmistakably alien. "She's alive," Jason muttered, checking her vitals with his scanner. Her pulse was erratic, but there. He wasted no time, hauling her into the skiff and sealing the pod back up. By the time they were back aboard the mining vessel, she had started to stir. Jason laid her on a cot in the cramped medbay, watching as her eyes fluttered open. "Where?" Her voice was soft but carried an edge of authority. "You're aboard the Prospector, a mining vessel," Jason said, keeping his tone measured. "Found your pod out in the asteroid field. You're lucky I came along." Her eyes narrowed as she sat up, clutching the edge of the cot. "You're human," she said, more an accusation than an observation. "Last I checked," Jason replied, folding his arms. "And you are?" She hesitated, her gaze darting around the room as if assessing her situation. "I am Princess Aelara of the Xanthus Empire," she said, her voice steady now. Jason raised an eyebrow. He wasn't sure what answer he'd expected, but that wasn't it. "Royalty, huh? Can't say I've ever had a princess on board." Aelara ignored his sarcasm and leaned closer, her expression serious. "You must listen to me. If my people discover I am here, they will destroy this vessel without hesitation." "Great," Jason muttered. "Anything else I should know? Like why you're out here in the first place?" Aelara hesitated again, then sighed. "I was fleeing an arranged political union, a marriage that would consolidate power between rival factions within our empire. But it would also destabilize the Xanthus as a whole. It's complicated." "Sounds like a royal mess," Jason said dryly. "You don't understand," she said, her voice sharpening. "If they find me, they won't just kill me. They'll use my capture to justify all-out war with your kind. You must help me stay hidden." Jason stared at her, weighing his options. Turning her over to the authorities would be the safest move for him anyway. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of fear and determination, that made him pause. "Why should I stick my neck out for you?" he asked. Aelara's expression softened, and she reached into a small compartment on her uniform, pulling out a data chip. "Because I can help you," she said. "This contains designs for Xanthus energy tech far more advanced than anything your colony on Mars has. With it, you could ensure your people's survival." Jason sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. He didn't like any of it, but he couldn't deny the allure of what she was offering. Mars was barely holding on as it was. This could be exactly what they needed. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll help you. But if this goes south, don't expect me to throw myself in front of the firing squad." Aelara gave a small nod, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. Over the next few days, Jason worked to repair Aelara's pod while keeping her presence hidden from the rest of the crew. It wasn't easy. Davis was nosy, and the ship's sensors weren't exactly cutting edge. But somehow, they managed. At first, their interactions were tense. Aelara seemed dismissive of humans, her tone often laced with thinly veiled disdain. But Jason's resourcefulness began to chip away at her icy demeanor. Whether it was jury-rigging a cloaking device from spare parts or navigating the asteroid field with near-impossible precision, he constantly surprised her. "I don't understand," she said one evening as they reviewed the progress on her pod. "Your species is so disorganized, and yet you accomplish so much with so little. It's perplexing." Jason smirked. "We call it ingenuity," he said. "You should try it sometime." Aelara rolled her eyes but said nothing. Their uneasy alliance continued as Xanthus patrols began sweeping the area, forcing them to move frequently. The tension was high, but so was the growing mutual respect between them. One day, as they hid behind a massive asteroid, Aelara turned to Jason. "You risked everything to help me," she said. "Why?" Jason shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "Guess I'm just a sucker for a good underdog story." Aelara frowned, but there was a hint of amusement in her expression. "You're an odd one, Jason Harper." "Yeah, well, you're not exactly Miss Congeniality yourself," he shot back. For the first time, Aelara laughed a sound that was as alien as it was oddly human. And in that moment, Jason realized he was in far deeper than he'd ever intended. The Xanthus warship loomed on the ship's rear sensor display like a storm cloud creeping over a clear horizon. Jason gripped the control panel, his knuckles whitening as he rerouted power to the engines, coaxing every ounce of speed from the aging vessel. The Prospector was no sprint ship. It was a lumbering, rust-covered beast of a freighter built to haul ore, not outrun one of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. But Jason had no intention of handing over his passenger without a fight. "They've locked onto us," Aelara said, her voice tight. She was perched behind him, her violet eyes scanning the readouts. "Their targeting systems are active." "Yeah, I noticed," Jason muttered. "Would it kill your people to dial things down? I mean, this whole shoot first, ask later vibe is a bit much." Aelara bristled. "The Xanthus do not negotiate with deserters, Jason. The fact that I'm here puts you in direct violation of interstellar law." "Great. I'll add that to the growing list of charges I'm racking up," he said, yanking hard on the yoke to avoid a field of debris from a long-forgotten skirmish. The Prospector groaned in protest, her bulk shuddering under the strain. "How about you focus on something useful, like how to not get us blown to pieces?" Aelara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The ship lurched again as Jason made another sharp turn, using the cover of an asteroid belt to break their pursuer's line of sight. His hands moved instinctively, flipping switches and recalibrating thrusters with a speed that belied the chaos around him. "They're not giving up," Aelara said, her voice cutting through the hum of the overstressed engines. Jason glanced at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "They're Xanthus. I wasn't expecting a gift basket and an apology letter." The warship's energy cannons fired, the blast narrowly missing the Prospector as Jason banked hard to the left. The ship groaned again, and Jason muttered under his breath, "Come on, girl, hold it together." Aelara's eyes widened as she watched him work. "You're flying this ship manually," she said, her tone a mixture of disbelief and awe. "Yeah," and Jason replied, not taking his eyes off the controls. "Your species relies on machines for most navigation," she said. "To see you do it yourself." Jason smirked despite the tension. "What can I say? Humans like to keep things interesting." The warship fired again, the blast clipping the rear hull. Warning lights flared across the console, and an alarm blared. "That wasn't decorative plating back there," Jason muttered, silencing the alarm with a flick of his wrist. "Aelara, get to the auxiliary power station. I need you to reroute everything we've got left to the engines." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding and hurrying toward the rear of the ship. Jason couldn't afford to think about the fact that he was trusting an alien royal fugitive to keep them in one piece. He didn't have time for doubt. As she disappeared into the corridor, Jason focused on the task at hand. The asteroid belt was dense, the massive rocks tumbling in unpredictable patterns. It was the perfect place to lose a pursuer if he didn't crash them into oblivion first. The Prospector weaved through the field with surprising agility, Jason's hands moving like a concert pianist hitting all the right notes in a chaotic symphony. The Xanthus warship, sleek and deadly, struggled to maneuver in the confined space. Jason allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction as one of their blasts struck an asteroid instead of his ship. Engines at maximum capacity, Aelara's voice crackled through the comm. I diverted life support from non-essential areas to compensate. Non-essential, Jason asked. The cargo hold and crew quarters, she clarified. The cockpit and auxiliary stations remain functional. Good call, Princess, Jason said, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You might just have a future in running for your life. I'll take that as a compliment, she replied dryly. Jason guided the prospector toward the edge of the asteroid belt, his pulse pounding in his ears. The warship was still on their tail, but it was falling behind, struggling to match the freighter's erratic movements. Jason made one last sharp turn, using the shadow of a particularly large asteroid to mask their escape. When they emerged on the other side, the warship was nowhere to be seen. Did we lose them? Aelara asked, reappearing in the cockpit. Her usually composed demeanor was frayed, her hair slightly disheveled. For now, Jason said, his hands still gripping the controls. But they'll be back. People like that don't take kindly to being outrun. Aelara sank into the co-pilot's seat, her shoulders sagging. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Jason replied, his tone gruff. We're not out of the woods. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. Finally, Aelara spoke. You're remarkably calm under pressure. Jason shrugged. Occupational hazard. You grow up in a place like Earth, you either learn to think on your feet or you don't make it. Is it true what they say about your planet, she asked? That it's a place of constant struggle. Depends who you ask, Jason said. For me, yeah, it was tough. I was an orphan, bounced around from one place to another. Had to scrap for everything I've got. Aelara looked at him, her expression unreadable. And yet, you survived, thrived even. Jason chuckled humorlessly. Wouldn't go that far. But I'm still here, so I guess that's something. She hesitated, then said, I wasn't lying when I said I fled my people. Being royalty isn't what you think. It's suffocating. Every decision I make is scrutinized. Every action is symbol for something greater than myself. I've never been allowed to simply be. Jason glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. Sounds rough. She nodded. It is, but seeing your resilience, your ability to adapt, it's inspiring. Jason raised an eyebrow. Inspiring, huh? That's a first. Aelara managed a small smile. Don't let it go to your head. Jason leaned back in his seat, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Well, Princess, looks like we've got more in common than I thought. Their moment of quiet reflection was interrupted by a proximity alert. A derelict structure appeared on the sensors, its outline silhouetted against a distant nebula. An abandoned research station, Jason said, narrowing his eyes. Could be just what we need. Aelara glanced at the display. Or a trap. Jason grinned. Only one way to find out. The research station was in worse shape than Jason had anticipated. Its outer hull was riddled with scorch marks, the telltale signs of an attack long past. A few sections had collapsed entirely, leaving jagged gaps that exposed the station's skeletal framework to the void of space. It drifted lifelessly in orbit around a barren moon, its faint energy signature flickering like a dying ember. Jason brought the prospector in close, maneuvering carefully to avoid the debris field surrounding the station. Aelara stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes scanning the ruins. She looked tense, her usual composure cracking under the weight of their predicament. Looks cozy, Jason said, his tone light despite the knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. Your definition of cozy is alarming, Aelara replied, though the faintest hint of a smirk tugged at her lips. Jason grinned. Well, beggars can't be choosers. This place might be falling apart, but it's off the grid. We can use it to lay low for a bit and figure out our next move. Aelara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze lingered on the station, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, if the Xanthus warship tracked us here, they'll assume we intend to use the station's systems. It could become a trap if we're not careful. True, Jason said, powering down the prospector's engines. But traps work both ways. If they come sniffing around, we'll make sure it's their problem, not ours. Aelara gave him a skeptical look but didn't argue. Instead, she followed him as he grabbed his toolkit and headed for the airlock. The station's interior was eerily silent, the only sounds their footfalls echoing through the empty corridors. The air was stale but breathable, the life support systems barely holding on. The walls were lined with flickering screens and dormant machinery coated in a fine layer of dust. It was clear no one had set foot in this place for years. Jason scanned the area with a handheld tracker, searching for the main control hub. Aelara walked a few steps behind him, her violet eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush at any moment. "Relax," Princess Jason said over his shoulder. "If there's anyone here, they're doing a damn good job of hiding." "Complacency is dangerous," Aelara replied. "Underestimating your surroundings can be fatal." Jason chuckled. "Noted. But right now, the only thing trying to kill us is the clock. Let's focus on staying ahead of the Xanthus." They found the control hub on the station's central deck, a circular room filled with consoles and monitors. Most of the systems were offline, but the main terminal still flickered faintly with power. Jason set to work immediately, his fingers flying over the controls as he accessed the station's network. "What are you doing?" Aelara asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Setting up a distraction," Jason said. "If the Xanthus trace is here, I want them chasing ghosts instead of us." Aelara watched him work, her expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "You're remarkably adept at improvisation," she said. Jason grinned. "Comes with the territory. Humans don't have the luxury of sticking to the script. We make it up as we go." "That much is obvious," Aelara muttered, though there was no malice in her tone. Jason tapped a final command into the terminal, and the station's systems hummed to life. Lights flickered on throughout the corridors, and the faint sound of machinery echoed through the structure. Jason had set the station's energy signature to mimic that of their ship, effectively creating a decoy. "That should buy us some time," he said, stepping back from the console. "Let's get out of here before they show up." But as they turned to leave, an alarm blared through the station. Jason and Aelara froze, their eyes meeting in a shared moment of dread. "They're already here," Aelara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason's mind raced. "We've got one chance," he said. "We sabotage the station's systems, completely make it look like it's self-destructed. That'll cover our escape and keep them off our trail." Aelara hesitated, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Jason handed her a plasma cutter from his toolkit. "Find the main power conduit and overload it. I'll rig the reactor to blow. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they board, so move fast." She took the tool without question and disappeared down the corridor. Jason watched her go for a moment before turning his attention to the reactor controls. His hands moved quickly, bypassing safety protocols and rerouting energy flows. He worked with the precision of someone who'd been in dangerous situations far too often. Minutes later, Aelara returned, her expression grim. "The conduit is set to overload," she said. "Good," Jason said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Now let's get out of here." They sprinted back to the prospector, the station's alarms growing louder with each passing second. Jason could feel the vibrations under his feet as the reactor began to destabilize. They barely made it to the airlock before the station's systems started to fail catastrophically. Once aboard, Jason powered up the engines and launched the prospector away from the station at full speed. Behind them, the station erupted in a blinding flash of light, the explosion sending debris scattering into the void. Jason let out a long breath, slumping back in his seat. "Well, that was fun," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Aelara sank into the co-pilot's chair, her usual poise replaced by a rare moment of vulnerability. "Fun isn't the word I would use," she said, her tone soft. Jason glanced at her, a small smile playing at his lips. "You did good back there, Princess. I wouldn't have made it without you." She met his gaze, her violet eyes glimmering faintly. "You're not as reckless as you pretend to be, Jason Harper." "And you're not as untouchable as you let on," he replied, his voice tinged with warmth. They sat in silence for a moment, the stars streaking past the cockpit windows as the prospector shot through the vast emptiness of space. The tension between them had shifted, a fragile but undeniable connection forming in the aftermath of their harrowing escape. but Jason knew better than to dwell on it. Their situation was still precarious, and there was no room for sentimentality. He leaned forward, setting a course for the nearest safe zone. "Where are we going?" Aelara asked. "To the Galactic Council," Jason said. "If what you told me about your people is true, then that data chip you're carrying is our best shot at stopping them." Aelara's expression hardened, her resolve returning. "It won't be easy." Jason smirked. "Nothing worth doing ever is." As the prospector disappeared into the void, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. For better or worse, they were in this together now, and there was no turning back. The Galactic Council chamber was a monolith of cold authority, its vaulted ceilings and gleaming black walls designed to dwarf anyone who stood within it. The air was heavy with the tension of countless debates and betrayals that had played out in this room over the centuries. Jason felt like an ant in the middle of a planetary storm, his boots clanging loudly against the polished floor as he followed Aelara toward the center of the massive circular hall. Around them, representatives from dozens of species filled the tiered seats that encircled the chamber. Some were encased in sleek exosuits, others swathed in ceremonial robes, and a few towered over the rest with bulk alone. The Xanthus delegation, seated prominently near the front, radiated hostility. Their golden armor gleamed under the chamber's lights, their expressions severe as their leader, High Consul Vyler, locked eyes with Aelara. "She dares to show her face here," Vyler's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Traitor. You shame the name of your royal lineage." Jason glanced at Aelara as they approached the central dais. Her posture was regal, her chin held high, but he could see the tension in her clenched fists. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them, but she showed no sign of faltering. "High Consul Vyler," Aelara said, her voice steady and clear, echoing through the chamber. "I am here to address the council, not to be judged by you." "You have no standing here," Vyler spat. "You abandoned your duties, fled your people, and now you consort with this." Barbarian, his cold gaze flicked to Jason, and the disdain in his eyes was palpable. Jason smirked, stepping forward before Aelara could respond. "Barbarian's a bit harsh, don't you think? I prefer resourceful underdog or maybe just human genius, but hey, call me what you want." The room erupted into a mix of laughter and outraged murmurs. Jason's eyes scanned the crowd, noting with satisfaction the few representatives who couldn't suppress a grin at his brazenness. Aelara shot him a look that was half warning, half amusement. Enough, boomed the voice of the council speaker, a towering, translucent figure whose shifting hues made it impossible to determine their species. "Princess Aelara, you have requested an audience to present evidence of a conspiracy within the Xanthus Empire. Be warned, any falsehoods spoken here will incur severe consequences." "I understand," Aelara said, stepping onto the dais. Jason followed her, the data chip clutched tightly in his hand. "But I assure you what I bring today is the truth, and it concerns not just the Xanthus but the entire galaxy." The chamber fell silent. All eyes were on Aelara as she took a deep breath and began. "For centuries, the Xanthus Empire has projected an image of unity and strength," she said. "But beneath that facade lies corruption and deceit. A faction within our government, led by High Consul Vyler, has been orchestrating a conspiracy to destabilize the Council and incite conflict among its member species. Their goal is to consolidate power and expand our empire at the expense of countless lives." The room erupted again, voices rising in anger and disbelief. Vyler stood abruptly, his golden cape billowing behind him. "Lies," he roared. "You spin tales to mask your own treachery, Aelara. You have no proof." Jason stepped forward, holding up the data chip. "Actually, we do," he said. "This little gem right here has everything you need to blow their conspiracy wide open." He handed the chip to the speaker, who inserted it into the chamber's central console. A holographic display flickered to life above the dais, showing intercepted communications, financial records, and deployment orders that detailed the Xanthus faction's machinations in excruciating detail. The evidence was damning. The room descended into chaos. Representatives argued loudly, some demanding immediate sanctions against the Xanthus, others calling for calm. Vyler's face twisted in fury as he pointed a finger at Aelara. "You will pay for this betrayal," he hissed. "You and your pet human." Aelara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the din with surprising force. "This is not about me," she said. "This is about justice. The Xanthus people deserve leaders who serve their interests, not their own lust for power." and the galaxy deserves peace, not manipulation and war. I stand here today not as a princess, but as someone who believes in the possibility of unity among our species. It was a human who taught me that. Jason blinked, caught off guard by her words. Aelara met his gaze for a brief moment, her expression softening before she turned back to the council. Jason Harper risked his life to bring this evidence to you. His courage and ingenuity are a testament to the strength of his people. If humanity can overcome its struggles and thrive, then so can we. The chamber fell silent once more, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The speaker studied her for a long moment before turning to the council. The evidence presented is clear and compelling. High Consul Weiler, you and your co-conspirators are hereby placed under arrest pending a full investigation. Weiler's face contorted with rage, but he said nothing as Xanthus guards moved to restrain him. The chamber erupted into applause, a sound that echoed like a thunderstorm in the vast hall. Aelara stood motionless, her expression unreadable as she watched her enemies being led away. When the commotion finally subsided, the speaker turned back to her. Princess Aelara, your actions today have restored honor to your name. The council commends your bravery. Jason clapped her gently on the shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. You did it, princess. But Aelara's smile was bittersweet. I've won the battle, but the war is far from over. Returning to the Xanthus Empire will mean facing my family and the pressure to resume my role as a pawn in the political games I've fought so hard to escape. Jason's grin faded. So don't go back. She looked at him, startled. What are you saying? I'm saying you don't have to live your life for them, Jason said. You've already proven you're more than just some royal figurehead. You've got the guts to stand up for what's right. So why not live for yourself for once? Aelara hesitated, her gaze searching his. And what about you, Jason Harper? Where will you go? Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mars was never really home to me. And after all this? I can't just go back to fixing coolant leaks and dodging corporate quotas. He paused, his voice softening. I think my place is wherever you are. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she might protest. But then her expression softened, and she reached out to take his hand. You would give up everything for me. Jason chuckled. Everything? Princess? I was living on borrowed time anyway. Besides, I hear the food's better wherever royalty hangs out. Aelara laughed, and for the first time it sounded free. Then let's go, she said. Together. They left the chamber hand in hand, the weight of the galaxy's politics finally lifting from their shoulders. Hours later, aboard a small spacecraft far from the chaos of the council, they sat side by side staring out at the endless expanse of stars. What now? Jason asked, his voice quiet. Aelara leaned her head against his shoulder, a soft smile on her lips. Now we chart our own course. No crowns, no titles, just freedom. Jason wrapped an arm around her, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. Sounds good to me. And with that, they disappeared into the vast unknown, two unlikely companions forging a path toward a future filled with uncertainty and endless possibility.